Sparingly. That's what I could not remember that for some reason. We will maybe, I don't know if we'll have time, but we may get into the section of hurtful speech. The subcategories that I have for speech are, general. That's the ones that just didn't really fall into any specific subcategory. Sparingly, hurtful speech, and of course sparingly is where we are currently. Peacemaking speech, encouraging speech, deceitful speech, and then the last subsection will be dealing with gossip. So, let's pick up right where we left off. And make sure I got the right translations up. Yes, New King James on the left, ESV on the right. So looking at continuing this subsection on using speech sparingly, watching how much, controlling how much we talk, controlling and wisdom, self-control to know, wisdom to know when to speak and when not to, and self-control to do which one is appropriate in that particular situation. Because there can be a situation where, if I'm a person who tends to talk too much, I can be in a situation where I speak and I shouldn't have. And so you've got to watch out for that. But I might be a person who tends to be quieter, and there might be a situation where I need to speak, but I don't. And so we talked about this with Ecclesiastes 3, a time for every purpose, time for every season. Well, there's a time to speak and there's a time to keep silent. We don't want to speak when it's a time to keep silent. We don't want to keep silent when it's a time to speak. And so whether it be a time, speaking in the form of, it may be that I need to talk to somebody about the Lord, about the gospel. I don't take advantage of that. I don't use that opportunity. It may be that something wrong is being said, and I don't oppose that. And so, it could go either way. But I think probably we would all have to agree that our biggest struggle is speaking when we'd be better off just not having said anything. I think most people, that's going to be the bigger challenge. All right, well, we left off at chapter 18 of Proverbs. We looked at 18:2. Fool hath no delight in understanding, but that his heart may discover itself. Or as the ESV says it, a fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion. Now, our next one is 18:13. And, I keep forgetting, I saw this looking at the live stream a while back where sometimes it cuts off the top a little bit. 18:13 says in the King James, he that answereth the matter before he heareth it, it is folly and shame unto him. Very similar wording in the New King James, and you see the ESV there. If one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame. Well, what's the idea here? I have in my notes, this is good manners, not to mention common sense. It's pretty easy to get in trouble with this one, isn't it? How do we sometimes give me an illustration or an example of what we're talking about here, answering a matter before you hear it?
Well, if you've been married over 5 years, that's true. Now, we got over 40, and I have just come to the conclusion, I do not have the magical ability to read minds. And so I will say, I cannot read your mind, so I need to know about A, B, and C. Share that with me.
I searched high and low, and I probably, if I knew the brand or whatever, I'm sure I could have found it. But sometimes you just can't remember enough of something to search and find it. But I remember there was a commercial years ago. In fact, I think there were a series of commercials. They were all some cell phone company, I believe. And somebody would get like this killer deal on new phones for the entire family. Like you get free phones for signing your 2-year contract or whatever. And the whole family would get a brand new, the latest iPhone or Samsung or whatever it was. And it was, just they're advertising it as such a killer deal. But the commercials, and the one that I remember particularly, and I just could not find it. I really wanted to either link to it or embed it in a PowerPoint or something to show y'all, because it's so funny. The guy's talking to his wife, and he says, "Honey," she says, "Hey, what's with this?" "Oh, I got us all new phones." "You did what?" "These are all brand new phones." "Yeah." And she loses it. She said, "I cannot believe you are so irresponsible. My mother was right. I should have married so-and-so." And the guy's like, "Oh, well, they were all free." And it's like she's already just destroyed him with this tirade she went on. And she didn't get the whole story, right? And he was trying to finish telling her, "Yeah, I got all these phones. I got them for free as part of signing up for this new plan." Well, you can answer a matter before you hear it, and you can get into trouble, right? And I tell you, I was going to say, I'll give you an example in Scripture. There are numerous examples in Scripture, but one that stood out in my mind, and I jotted down in my notes to mention, there's a fella that comes to another fella, and he tells him about a situation. And the fellow that he's talking to is pretty powerful. In fact, he was the king. And he gets angry. Yeah, you know where I'm going with this, Miss Tammy. He gets angry. Oh, he's talking about a man that had a little ewe lamb, and it was so precious to him. And here comes this rich fella, and he just takes that lamb away. And that king, he is furious. And he just blurts out mid-story, "I'm going to tell you what, I'm paraphrasing here, but he says, that's not going to happen on my watch. Not in my kingdom. Nobody is going to treat someone like that. And I'm telling you right now, the man that has done this, he is going to die." And Nathan, he says, "Thou art the man. It's you, David." And whoo, man, don't you know that hit hard. And sometimes, by the way, we've studied parables before, kind of in a general way. Sometimes that's the purpose of a parable, it's to sort of, we often say parables are to reveal truth, but parables are also to conceal truth sometimes. Not necessarily in the sense of God doesn't want you to know it, but it's the idea of just like with David. You're going along, and the righteous indignation is just reaching a fever pitch, understandably so. And he says, "I'm not putting up with that." And then it flips on him. And Nathan says, that's actually a parable about you, David. And of course, how you handle it from there is critical. David handled it the right way. I also had a note down here in my notes. There's another one, another good example in Scripture in Joshua chapter 22. You have 2.5 tribes. Ephraim, that's not right. Good night, I forgot that. Somebody look in Joshua 22 and tell me the 2 tribes. It's something, half tribe of Manasseh. It might be Ephraim and Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh. Do what? Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh. Thank you. I don't know why. I just had Ephraim stuck in my brain. But anyway, they remember earlier on, Numbers 32, they told Moses before they go into the promised land, they're on what we call sometimes the Trans-Jordan, the eastern side of Jordan. And they say to Moses, "Hey, look, we have a lot of cattle. And, man, it sure is beautiful, perfect pasture land here. We're kind of thinking maybe this should just be our inheritance." And that Moses, I don't know if I'd say that's an example of answering a matter before he hears it, because he But he gets pretty strong with them. He says, he just immediately says, shall your brethren go to war, and shall you sit here? And they say, no. We're going to go and help fight the battles and take the land. That's our responsibility. What we were thinking is we would build some houses, some folds, keep our, have our sheep, our cattle enclosed, leave our wives, our little ones here, then we're going to go and fight the battles with you. And Moses says, okay, deal. But know that if you don't, chapter 32, 23, be sure your sin will find you out. Now, fast forward to Joshua 22, they did. They went. They fought the battles. They helped their brethren. And in Joshua 22, Moses says, essentially, well done. You did what you promised you would do. I release you. Go and enjoy the blessings that God has given you in your inheritance. And they go back. But on the way, they did something. What did they do? They set up this monument. They take these stones and they start to set them up. And the other 9.5 tribes go, hold on here. And they are upset. And they come ready to go to war. Because they think they've set up this idolatrous altar. And part of this is part of this you're like, okay, good, because they were ready to defend. And God's word was very clear about that in Deuteronomy, repeating the law to the new generation. If somebody says, let us go after other gods, that's a capital crime. They're to be put to death. They knew better than that. You don't put up with that. So in that sense, it's good that they didn't just go, oh, well, that's too bad. They're going to worship an idol. Well, what can you do? All right, let's go back home. But they kind of jumped the gun a little bit, and it almost leads to a civil war. Thankfully, though, they did. It kind of almost at the last minute. They talk about it. And these 2.5 tribes, they say, whoa. We're not building an idolatrous altar. Here's what we were thinking. We're going to be on the other side of Jordan, and it may be that in years to come, your grandchildren or great-great-grandchildren may say to our great-great-grandchildren, you don't have any part with us. I mean, we're all, look at us. We're all over here on this western side of Jordan. You're on, we used, sometimes growing up, people talk about, somebody lives on the wrong side of the tracks. And I used to tease Amy when she lived over there. She lived, I forget what the street was over here, but it's on the other side of the railroad tracks here in Bremen. And I said, one of us is living on the wrong side of the tracks. And I don't know which one of it is, but we're on opposite sides of the track. We used to say that growing up. I don't hear that as much nowadays, but they say, your great-great-grandchildren may say to ours, you're on the wrong side of the Jordan. You don't have any part with us. He says, we just want a monument, something that's going to last. And that will remind our grandchildren, your grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, and so on, that, hey, we're all part of the one family of God, the nation of Israel, descendants of Abraham. We want to make sure that gets remembered. And the other 9.5 tribes are kind of like, oh, yeah, okay, that's great. I mean, they're ready to go to war. And almost did. But, we can get ourselves in trouble. And then, of course, King Ahasuerus in the book of Esther. There's a good one where somebody answered a matter before he heard it. Said, oh, King, you really are great. And I tell you what, we can bring some more money into the kingdom. If you'll just sign this decree, there's this people, they're a nuisance. Well, little did he know, his wife that he loved so much, Esther, was one of those people. And of course, there's some similarity with Darius in Daniel chapter 6. "Oh, king, you're the greatest. You should sign a decree that if anybody prays to any other being, deity, for 30 days besides you, oh, most magnificent king, then they should be thrown into the lion's den." And he's just kind of like, "Yeah, that sounds like a great plan." So he signs it into law. And, well, he loved Daniel. He respected Daniel. And here comes Daniel. And Daniel's not going to pray to the king. Daniel's going to pray to no one but the one true God. And now the king's like, oh, and he realizes he kind of messed himself up. So, again, a lot of examples in Scripture we could look at. But, boy, this is one, as I put in my notes here, it's easy to get into trouble this way. Don't answer a matter before you hear it. We often say, get all the facts. And, we could also point out, how do you claim to respect somebody if you don't even listen to them and get all the facts? By the way, is it not also easy as parents to fall into this trap? I have been on both ends of this. There was a time once when I was in trouble with my mom, and I'm trying to explain it, and she's like, Don't you just be quiet, I'm talking. And I'm like, "Mom, but listen." She's like, "Don't you say another word. You say another word, I'm coming at you." And I'm like, what do you do? It's like, do I face that wrath, or do I sit there quietly? And so it's like, you be quiet, and then they let you have it, and like, can I speak now? Now, what do you have to say for yourself? Well, then you say it, and she's like, "Oh, well." And I've been there as a parent as well, where maybe I'm assuming and I'm not getting all the facts, and sometimes doing the same thing where we're just so worked up. Maybe we're so certain that we're right. And I don't want to hear your argument. I don't want to hear any back talk. In fact, you know what? You're not going to say another word. You're going to sit there and listen. And then you find out. And it's like, oh, man, that's a bad feeling. Don't answer a matter before we hear it. And so there's a lesson for everybody in that one. I read an illustration here. It said John was driving home late one night, and he picked up a hitchhiker. People, you got to be careful with that nowadays, but back in the day, my dad was telling about his days in the Air Force. He got to leave. I think he was up near D.C. Hitchhiked his way home to Gadsden, Alabama. You used to could do that, but I don't recommend it now. But John was driving home late one night, and he picked up a hitchhiker. As they rode along, he got a little suspicious of this fella. And so he always kept his wallet in the pocket of his coat on the console. He had his coat on the console there. He always kept his wallet in there. Well, he's kind of subtly, he don't want to tell this guy that he's suspicious of him, so he starts reaching and he feels that that spot's flat. And that's when he knew, this fella has robbed me. And it kind of just made him furious. I mean, he just slammed on the brakes. He tells this hitchhiker, "Get out and hand over the wallet." Well, I mean, this guy was just, and he reached in his pocket and hands it to him. And John took off. And he gets home and he says, "Honey, you are not going to believe what happened." And she said, "Hold on, before I forget, did you realize you left your wallet at home this morning?" And he's like, "Oh." We answer a matter before we hear it, we can get into trouble. All right, let's move on. There's so much more we could say with that one. That's just one of those that, man, some of these Proverbs, I feel like, especially the ones with speech, I feel like I ought to just put on my mirror and read it like every single day, to try to work on those things. Let's go to chapter 20. And as always, if you got something to add, comment, question, whatever, just jump in, because sometimes I get to go in and. Yes, sir.
John chapter 11 is fascinating. You've got Lazarus has died. Martha goes and confronts Jesus. But if you'd have been here, my brother would have died. But we know that whatever you ask
Yeah, that's true. I hadn't thought about that one, but yeah, he says, look, your brother's going to live again. Well, of course, I know that at the resurrection. Well, that's not what he was talking about. It certainly he is going to live again at the resurrection, but yeah, it's like, yeah, I wonder if sometimes if Jesus ever was, maybe it's not recorded in Scripture, but if he ever just kind of said that to somebody sometime, like, hey, will you just let me finish? Can I just finish my sentence here? Yeah, that's a good one there in John chapter 11. All right, chapter 20, verse 25. Keep 20:25. It is a snare to the man who devoureth that which is holy, and after vows to make inquiry. Now this one, at first glance, it's kind of like, okay, why is this one in the speech section? But just bear with me, because you see 25 there, verse 25 in the New King James, pretty similar. It's a snare for a man to devote rashly something as holy. But here's where you start to get a sense of how it involves our speech. And afterward, to reconsider his vows. ESV says it's a snare to say rashly, it is holy, and to reflect only after making vows. We'll get into some of this, Lord willing, on Sunday morning. We look at Ecclesiastes chapter 5. But the idea here is you're speaking, you're declaring something as holy, which means what? Set apart. It's set over here by itself, and that could have, it's used quite often. I'm trying to think, maybe always in Scripture, in a sense of setting apart something as holy for God. But it could also be used in a generic sense. I mean, I've mentioned before, it used to be very common. People would have like sets of china. That'd be like special occasion dinnerware. But it was sanctified. It was holy in the sense that it was only used for certain occasions, certain purposes. You didn't just eat off that every day. My mom had some of that type stuff, plates and such, and every once in a while my sister and I would, if they were gone, we'd get that out and we'd have ourselves like a real fancy little party, knowing good and well that if we ever got busted, it was going down. We were going to get a serious, just get torn up for that. It was going to be bad. But that's kind of the idea. It can be a general use, general sense, or it can be, and most often is, in the spiritual sense. So that's the idea, is somebody who is saying something is holy, or it might even be like making a vow. And again, you get that in the last phrase there in the ESV, to reflect only after making vows. When's the time to reflect? Before you make the vow. Before you say it's holy. So in other words, be careful, very careful before making promises. The heat of the moment may skew your assessment of your ability to fulfill that vow, that promise, and or your desire to fulfill that vow or that promise. What seems so intense right now may not seem so much so when you get out of the heat of the moment. And how many times do people do that? Maybe they're in trouble. Maybe they're in a bad situation. And, I've told the story before, sort of humorously, but it's, I can look back and laugh now because I lived to see the other side of it, I guess. But I used to be a very spiritual person if I was in trouble, because at school, a lot of times if you got sent to the principal's office, the deal was they had these like 4 chairs out there, like 2 on either side of the door. You had to just sit in those. And it could be your lucky day. Maybe he's in a meeting. Maybe he's doesn't even come out of his office for that entire period until the bell rings, because he's just so busy working on something. And sometimes it's just like, you feel like you're in one of those movies, and every little like move of the second hand of the clock is just like, and so could be your lucky day, or maybe the day that he may just get up right away, and he comes out there, and if he sees somebody sitting in those chairs, hey, what are you doing here? Well, a lot of times I'd be sitting in those chairs, and I'm praying. Fervently praying, and man, if God would just keep him inside that office or keep him away from that office, from seeing me, man, I'll do this for the Lord, I'll do that. And of course, some of that was just, little kids, elementary school, but that's how people get sometimes, and they make all these vows, these promises. He says, be careful about that. I heard about the fellow that he was talking to his preacher one day, and he says, I want you to know, if I had $1 million, I'd give a quarter of that to the church. And the preacher said, well, that's pretty commendable. What if you had $500,000? If I had $500,000, I'd give a quarter of that to the church. What if you had $100,000? He said, well, that's a tough ask, but yeah, if I had $100,000, I would do that. What if you had 1,000? The guy says, hang on now, preacher, you know I have $1,000. Sometimes it's easy to say when we don't have something, it's way out there. But the verse teaches us to slow down and consider both the practicality and the realistic, or realism, maybe is a better way to put it, of the particular vow. And of course, we see this illustrated nowhere more clearly than with Jephthah in Judges 11:30 through 39. I don't believe, I've told y'all before, I think the text does not bear out that he offered his daughter as a human sacrifice in the sense of killing her. But nevertheless, it was a sacrifice in the sense of her being devoted. She would remain a virgin till the time of her death. Some folks take that to mean that he did offer her as a human sacrifice. I can say this, if he did that, if he did offer her, take her life and kill her and offer her as a human sacrifice, he didn't do that with God's approval. God never has wanted or accepted human sacrifice. God's very clear in the law of Moses when it came to humans. Animals, the first of the flocks, the best of the flock went to God. You sacrificed it. But when it came to humans, you redeemed it. And so you would have some folks that would dedicate their lives to God's service and things like that. So I believe she remained a perpetual virgin. But regardless, he made a very rash, thoughtless vow. He just blurts out, oh, if God will give me the victory, I tell you what, whatever comes out of my house when I get home, I'm just going to take it, and that's going to be dedicated to God. I'm offering that to God. Okay, well, you've only got one child. So I ain't very good at math, but there's a pretty high probability that when you get home, the first thing coming out of the house is either your wife or your child. It's just a thoughtless vow. He just didn't give it a whole lot of thought. There's another example in 1 Samuel 14, 24 through 30. King Saul makes a very rash vow. Does anybody remember this? What did he say? They're pursuing Philistines. King Saul says, cursed be the man that eats until we have finished this slaughter of the Philistines. Well, then all the people get tired and they're growing faint and they're giving out. But they can't eat because, he said, cursed be the man that eats. And of course, here you have Jonathan, who doesn't know. He wasn't there when Saul uttered this very stupid, foolish curse. And so he sees some honey, reaches out and takes some, and immediately, as honey does, he immediately, almost instantaneously feels some relief, some energy, and now the people are kind of like, oh, and there's all the drama that follows after because of that. But it was just a stupid thing to do, and it hindered them defeating the Philistines because that people were so tired. Herod also made a foolish vow. Mark chapter 6, 22 through 26. Here comes Herodias' daughter. Oh, and she dances, and he gets so caught up in the moment watching her dance. And he says, oh, you I tell you what, you just ask me for anything you want. I'll give it to you up to half the kingdom. Well, Mama had already instructed her. She was upset because John the Baptizer had told Herod, it's not lawful for you to have her. And she didn't like that. Herod didn't like that either, but he was loath to kill John. Maybe some of that's, no doubt he feared the people, but there seemed to be other reasons as well. But she told her daughter, we got him now. Ask for John the Baptist's head. And it said he was sorry. Yet, why did he do that? It says, for what sake? For the oath's sake. He made a really stupid, foolish vow. And he got himself into trouble. And he said, well, what am I going to do? Well, he should have done the right thing and just ate the vow. But nevertheless. And there's a lot to say about vows in the Old Testament. Again, we'll talk more about this in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, but Ecclesiastes 5, 1 through 7 mentions about keeping your foot when you go to the house of God. Be more ready to hear than to give the sacrifice of fools. In other words, be more ready to hear than to speak. Don't be rash with your mouth, verse 2 says. Let not thine heart be hasty to utter anything before God. Therefore, let thy words be few, the end of that verse. A fool's voice is known by a multitude of words at the end of verse 3. So a lot there in Ecclesiastes chapter 5 relative to this as well. All right, let's go to our next verse. But a lot of wisdom there. Be very, very careful when it comes to making promises, making vows of any type, whatever it might be, whether it's declaring something holy, telling somebody you're going to do something, because God expects us to keep our word. Now, he doesn't want us to keep our word when it means doing something that is sinful, but that's where it comes into play, where you need to be thoughtful. Chapter 23. Verse 9. Speak not in the ears of a fool, for he will despise the wisdom of thy words. Do not speak in the hearing of a fool, for he will despise the wisdom of your words, or the good sense of your words in the ESV. It's akin to saying, hey man, save your breath. Don't waste your time trying to give good advice to a fool, because he won't listen anyway. Why won't he listen? Well, because Proverbs 18:2 says, a fool, we already noticed this in our last class and mentioned it just at the very beginning of this class. A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion. So save your breath. Don't waste your breath on trying to give advice to a fool, because he's not listening. Unless it happens to agree with what he already thinks or what is already his opinion. Now, kind of going with this, and you see an interesting paradox in chapter 26, verses 4 and 5. Answer not a fool according to his folly, lest thou also be likened to him. And then verse 5 says, answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own conceit. This is interesting. Alden, in his commentary, I've enjoyed looking through a lot of his thoughts on many of these Proverbs. He says it was one of the more interesting paradoxes in all of the book of Proverbs. A couple of ways of looking at this. He says it may be that he's saying don't answer so you don't run the risk of being foolish also. But if you do answer, you might prevent him from thinking he's smart. I don't know that I agree with that necessarily. I'm not saying, it may very well be that is the case. I just think probably most likely that the idea here is there's a time for one and there's a time for the other. There's a certain time when you need to answer a fool in his folly, according to his folly rather, lest he be wise in his own eyes. But then there's a time when you don't need to answer a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him. Bob, you were going to say something?
There's a whole approach to apologetics, Christian fool, it just means somebody who may have a lot of education, a lot of intellect, but they don't really use it very effective. And then something like Mr. King, you know, you remember that guy? It says, answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own conceit. So there is a time to talk to the atheist about the foolishness about what he believes, the foundational foolishness of what he believes, in front of himself and maybe other people. Why? Lest he be wise in his own conceit. And that is being effective as a defender of the faith. So from an apologetic standpoint, there is something to be said about that, right?
Yeah, and I think, to me, one of the best illustrations of this would be, I don't know, I guess it was nearly 20 years ago. I believe it was the last year that the Memphis School of Preaching had an open forum. Rachel's feller sent me a link to a YouTube video. I don't know, it's been a week or two ago. He said, have you seen this? And I texted him back. I said, bro, I was there. There was a fella that he actually used to work with us at GBN. But he got into this, there was this sect, this small group of fellas that some were preachers, some were just Christians, that they got on this kick of a woman could never, never, ever teach a man. And that's just not what the Bible teaches. And the Bible very clearly teaches a woman cannot teach over a man. She cannot teach or in any other way usurp authority over the man. That is clear New Testament teaching. But to say that the New Testament teaches a woman can never teach a man, period, is just false. And they got so far with this, and sometimes you can know something is false just by following it to its logical conclusion. And I'll give them credit. A lot of them in that core group, they at least stayed true and they stayed consistent. But they had to be consistent, they had to go eventually to the point of saying that even if you had a Christian lady whose husband was not a Christian, and he asked her a question, maybe he's starting to get interested in Christianity, and he asked her a question, that the only thing she could do was open her Bible and point him to a verse. Because anything more than that, she would be teaching. Now, that's how ludicrous it got. But again, at least for consistency's sake, they sounded like goofballs, but they stayed consistent. But anyway, this fella, he got up at the open forum and he says, I want to ask a question about, he put the question in there. Brother Garland Elkins was still alive at that time, and he did the open forum. He answered the question, and this fella came to the microphone, and he wanted to continue talking about it. Well, Brother Mosier got pretty upset, and probably let his emotions get the better of him, because he got pretty aggravated with this fella. I was aggravated too, but and part of why Brother Mosier got so upset was because he felt like the guy was disrespecting Brother Elkins, and he was really looking out for Brother Elkins. But I tell you what, if you knew Garland Elkins, you knew he didn't need anybody looking out for him, because he was pretty sharp. But it kind of went back and forth, and then this younger fellow, he says, well, we'd be happy to debate this. We'd like to set up a debate. And I think Brother Elkins' response was, well, you need to find something worthwhile to debate and quit dwelling on this foolishness. But there are times when we may think, okay, here's somebody, and they're clamoring for a debate. And boy, sometimes even they'll say, and I remember a few, Bob, to your point with apologetics. I was trying to remember the guy. It might have been Farrell Till. I think it was Farrell Till that would try to goad Wayne Jackson into a debate. And on the outside, we might look at that and go, why will he not deal with this guy? Like, he needs to debate him. I don't even remember what the issue was when I was in preaching school. There was some group that kept attacking the school. Oh, they want to debate. Let's debate, and we can finally settle this. And I remember even thinking to myself, why will Brother Cates and somebody from the school not just debate them on this, and like they said, let's put an end to this. And one day, Brother Cates, he got all the students together in chapel, and he said, in fact, I believe, if I remember correctly, he read this verse. And he said, we're not going to give them an audience. That's what they want. They don't have an audience. They don't have a wide hearing. And if they can get a debate and get a bunch of people there, they've got a place to spread their propaganda, their false teaching. And Wayne said nearly the exact same thing about, I think it was Farrell Till, whoever this guy was that kept trying to goad him into a debate. Wayne said, I'm not. And a lot of times the one that wants to clamor for the debate, they'll say, oh, you're chicken. You know you can't, you know you don't have the truth. If you did, you'd debate. And boy, they'll do all kind of things to try to, you just thought that was high school when you're chicken if you don't. Sometimes people will do that with anything. All kind of things try to goad you into that debate. But Brother Jackson said almost the exact same thing. He said, this guy doesn't have, he wants a wider audience, a wider hearing to spread this nonsense, and I'm not giving it to him. And there have been other occasions when something was kind of starting to make waves in the brotherhood, or something was getting a foothold, such as maybe it was the anti-Bible class, the one cup doctrine, saying it's wrong to have a fellowship hall. There's different. Sometimes people call it antiism, and I don't say that to be disrespectful. I know sometimes folks will get upset about that, and they say, "Hey, we're non-institutional. We're not anti." And so I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but the non-institutionalism, there are all different varieties of that. But some of those things really started making a foothold. What was it, back in maybe the 50s, 60s, maybe even earlier slightly? And so a number of brethren, G.K. Wallace was one that really stepped forward. And he dealt with it. And he debated those folks and showed that this was not scriptural to take those hard-line positions and bind where God is not bound. Premillennialism really started making some inroads in the church. What would that be? Foy Wallace's days. Anybody remember 70s, or would that be more like 60s? Somewhere in that range. But Brother Wallace stepped forward in books, in debates, sermons, and he took that on. But he would meet them in debate because it was really starting to make inroads into the church. And so I think that's what you see here in chapter 26, 4 and 5 is, there's a time when you need to answer a fool and his folly. There's a time when you just need to have the self-control to say, you know what, I'm not getting dragged down into the mud with you. I'm not getting dragged down to your level. And somebody says, how do you know the difference? How do you know which one? Wisdom. And sometimes that's from making mistakes and getting experience. Anything else on that? I know we're about out of time. Thank y'all so much. We'll pick up, our next verse will be 29:11. We'll pick that up, God willing, next week. A fool uttereth all his mind, but a wise man keepeth it in till afterwards. Thank y'all.